All right. Good afternoon, everyone. Maybe for some, good evening, good morning. Nice to have you here all today in another very interesting webinar. Gwen, super happy to have you.
Thank you.
We're going to speak about DE&I in recruitment and how to get the management team on board, which I think it's an interesting discussion because DE&I is, I think, definitely the number one topic that a lot of HR and recruitment departments are talking about. If we do look at the results, though, over the last couple of years, I don't know if things have really changed, but we will get there in a second. Before I let you introduce yourself, practical notes for everyone who's listening today. In the lower right corner of your screen, there is a chat functionality and also questions tab. So if you click on that, feel free to share all the questions that you have for Gwen, and we will try to answer them all throughout today's webinar. It's going to be between 30 and 45 minutes, depending on how many questions we have for today. Maybe a quick introduction of who I am, and then Gwen, I would like to hand it over to you. So my name is Charlotte. I'm one of the founders of Equalture. We are an HR tech company based in Rotterdam in the Netherlands, and we are on a mission to shape the world of unbiased hiring. So I started this company a couple of years ago together with my twin sister Fleur, with the goal basically to make sure that everyone gets an equal opportunity to showcase their talents and eventually to get hired for a job. So DE&I is it's very close to home here. And why I'm so excited about today's webinar is there's so much friction between, we all know we need it, but no one really knows how to do it. So very much looking forward to your insights today, Gwen. For the people who don't know you yet, could you introduce yourself and also your role at Hexaware?
Sure. Hi, everyone, and thanks for having me. So my name is Gwen. I have a career in people and culture for almost over 20 years, and I've always been focusing on larger programs like talent programs or graduate programs or merger and acquisitions. I really enjoy being in the people and culture field. I over the years I also felt that I was more and more focused from my angle towards diversity, equity, and inclusion, or whatever form it then was. But I could feel that the differences between people and how I have my own lived experiences are a focus point of mine. And in 2021, I started as a people and culture leader in Mobiquity, which is a boutique firm, a global boutique firm that helps companies with their digital transformation and their digital brands and products and services, focusing on banking, healthcare, and retail. And Mobiquity became part of Hexaware in 2019, so 2 years before I joined Mobiquity, to make it a bit complex. But Hexaware is a big global IT tech company, an Indian one. And also Hexaware is focused on the digital era and help customers move into that digital era through automation, cloudification, and customer experiences. You can compare Hexaware a little bit with TCS or Accenture or Capgemini or Cognizant and Accenture. So they requested me to pick up the role of global DEI head last year. And build that from scratch. And that was an interesting question because why wasn't it there before? But I can address that a little bit later in the podcast or in the video cast. But so my role is to build up this DE&I strategy and focus and program in Hexaware.
Cool. Yeah, and I do have a follow-up question, but I always have a couple of slides to quickly introduce the topic, sure. And then I will get back to that. I always like sharing some statistics, but what actually happened then over the last couple of years. So Glassdoor published a very interesting research, I think in November last year. We will include it in the recap email of this webinar. And one of the outcomes of that research was that almost 80% of all employees and job seekers, at least who were interviewed, obviously, said that they value a diverse workforce, and that it's also an important factor when they are evaluating whether or not to apply for a company. So that's quite a big chunk. especially Gen Zs and millennials. If you look at that group, that percentage goes up even more, and they do represent quite a big group. And almost 40% of the same people who answered that questionnaire said they also wouldn't apply for a company if that company had, for example, negative satisfaction ratings amongst people of color. So those percentages are quite high. And obviously, I didn't include any studies here because I hope that is crystal clear nowadays. But there's hundreds of studies out there, of course, that have already proven that having a diverse and an inclusive environment is a proven business case. I think the McKinsey research, for example, is it's a very tangible one. So based on all those researches and these statistics, you would assume that we would be doing better today. I included one research as the last part of my introduction that our head of science shared in our Slack group a couple of weeks ago. I included the source there as well, so you will get it. And there was a research that basically looked into from an ethnical diversity perspective or ethnical discrimination perspective, actually. Have things changed over the last 20, 30 years? And what you can see in this graphic, especially the lower right one, is that for Middle Eastern and North African job applicants, discrimination actually went up. Also in the Netherlands, I'm based in the Netherlands myself. They also recently published a new study indicating that job discrimination has actually get worse over the last 20 years. So we would expect to be doing better. People are more interested in the topic. People value the topic more. But for some reason, when it comes to tangible action, the opposite even seems to be happening. And I think that's a very interesting starting point for our discussion today, Gwen, because you mentioned you were the first one within Hexaware to do the job that you're doing today. What was the urgency for them to create this job?
Yeah, so being an Indian company, they have an Indian view. So their culture is extremely diverse. The Indian culture itself, you have, I think, 29 states, different legislations, different languages. I think they have 100 official languages, but 1,000 unofficial languages. They connect over food, they connect over religion. All these differences in the Indian culture make them feel, and that they are extremely diverse. So they, for their perspective, they've already been working on diversity and inclusion, but now, becoming a really an organization that really focuses on global expansion and international footprint, they realize that, we also need a global focus with regards to diversity, equity, and inclusion. So that is where they decided to take a person to drive this in the organization.
Yeah. So is it fair to say that it was more driven by a business perspective?
I think both, but yes, obviously, we have our investors, we have our clients that also are pushing for more diversity. We have our, people coming in and also globally having, asking for, where are our programs, where is our focus, and how do we change that into, a more global view and not only the Indian view. So yes, obviously, if you think about intrinsic motivation versus business motivation, there's always this balance that you need to look for. And to start somewhere, I would also always start with business, because then you have an angle that is more sellable. Unfortunately, it works that way sometimes.
Yeah, well, I actually wrote down, I always make some notes prior to the webinar, and I wrote down, because I've had a lot of discussions with DE&I experts on this topic. Should the angle of creating urgency in the boardroom be it's fair or it works for your business? And I think I hear you saying we would have hoped for a situation in which people would do it because it's fair. The reality is that the business case maybe works better.
Well, I don't know what it should be, but I believe, people in the audience will probably agree with me that and you too, as when you're passionate about DEI and you see it as a no-brainer, because I see it as a no-brainer as well. It's sometimes very frustrating to create that business case. Why do you even need that? People, open your eyes. This is good for everybody. It's a social and moral imperative. It's the right thing to do. And I fully agree with that, obviously. But when speaking to leaders, and especially in organizations where there is less diversity, or a large majority of a specific demographic of DEI, then I think if you change the angle of talking about diversity and inclusion will help, because thinking about diversity and inclusion, it's about cultural change, leadership, transformation. If you really want to have a lasting change in your organization, it's not an HR thing. It's not a siloed project. It's not, a one-off thing and that stands there in the corner. It needs to be ingrained in everything that you do in the organization. So it takes a big step forward and a cultural change in an organization. And therefore, I think the approach to having it linked to business will be more successful. Because if you think about, the world today, there are so many things that are happening, social challenges, climate challenges, cramped markets, recession, all these different things. Ambiguity is sort of, the state of where we are in. And I think that more and more companies understand that more diverse ways of looking at problems and looking at challenges and ideas is the way to navigate through that ambiguity. And if you want to grow your business and sustainable growth of your business, you need to look at, how diverse you are as a company and how inclusive, of course, as well. So I think if you take that angle, it will help to have the conversations with your leadership and truly talk about, okay, what challenges do we see, right, in the market, for instance. So a lot of organizations, I think, struggle with the same things. They want to have more talent, they want to retain the talent that they have, and they want to deepen their footprint in international markets or deepen their relationship with their customers and clients. And if you start having conversations with leadership about that, what are your challenges? What do we want to reach as a company? What do we want to achieve? And how you as a leader, what is it that you want to achieve with your team? How do you want to be seen as a leader? And how do you want to become successful? Most of the answers that you will get from the leaders, you can immediately link to D&I. And therefore change D&I as being a business enabler rather than we need to do this. Because this is, I think, more appealing towards your personal way of receiving it. I also believe that, my experience and talking to people in the market, people are a bit afraid of DEI sometimes as well. I'm doing stuff wrong and I'm getting blamed, or it's difficult, or it's not about me, it's about them, let them fix it. And although I have, lots of feelings about that and lots of, having to say something about that, if you change that more towards how can we make sure that we create sustainable growth in our company? And what do we need for that? D&I is almost always the answer.
Yeah, it's an interesting point you're making. Before I ask you a follow-up question about that, a very broad question, maybe, let's see. Because I just showed the outcomes of the research, and I don't know if you've read that, but in the Netherlands, there were quite some articles published over the last month or so about the fact that we are not necessarily doing better. I even read an article that I think 2 days ago that families with a migration background, that the kids who were born in the Netherlands now have even more difficulties, for example, on the labor market and within companies than their parents. So it seems to be actually getting worse instead of better. But at the same time, you also see that in a lot of companies, at least enterprise companies, most of them have appointed a D&I team, or at least one person who cares about D&I. Why do you think that not so much has changed over the last 20 years, while we are trying to do things better than we did 20 years ago?
Yeah, that's a good question, but hard to answer.
I should have given you an extra hour, I think.
Well, yeah, you can look at it from multiple angles, right? And it's saddening, right? First of all, I can immediately feel this because it's just so annoying. I think when you have discussions about DEI, you also silo different groups, right? So you have this pendula, is that the English word? The pendula that goes back and forth. I think that's the English word, right? So when I think about this, I always think about that pendula. So when you have the minority groups on my left side and the majority group on the right side, and now there's more and more noise from the minority groups claiming their power and claiming their seat at the table and claiming their existence, you see that they move towards the majority group and push there and claim their roles. And if you want to meet each other in the middle, this needs to happen before you meet each other in the middle. So I think, that whole situation of minorities showing up is also creating a pushback. Yeah. So I think, it has to do with a lot of things, and it has to do with culture. It's the way that we in the Netherlands, we look at discrimination, how we deal with that. Do we look at our role as a company, as a country in history? Do we acknowledge what we did, or do we acknowledge what we do? So there are so many different angles and ways to look at it.
Yeah, it's well, sometimes things first need to go down a little bit before they go up faster. I mean, it's let's hope it's the case here. Hey, what you just said was interesting, because I think that it's the main topic of today's webinar. Of course, I think that there are a lot of people listening today who are in maybe a similar position that you have in a company, or a more general HR/recruitment position, but do care about DE&I. So how to get the boardroom ready to invest some more time in that. And what you basically said, but correct me if I'm summarizing it not fully accurate, is you have to sit down with the management team, basically list what are the main challenges, what are the things that keep you up at night as a leader, and how can we basically link all those different challenges to DE&I? Because I agree, I think it's a lot of challenges go back to DE&I eventually, because I think it's the people in your company that make or break your company at the end of the day. But something that when you said it, I thought, okay, I do agree with the fact that that's probably creates the urgency to, at least on a short term, for example, do more about getting a more diverse group of people in the organization. It's usually how most companies start, just more diversity at the front door, and then we will see what happens once people are in. But if it's purely being approached from a business case perspective, then should we worry about the inclusion part that comes after that?
Of course.
Because it's good, of course, if your company gets more diverse. But if you walk into the company and you might get the feeling like, okay, leadership is only doing this because it serves a business case, then maybe people leave again.
No, absolutely. Diversity cannot exist without inclusion. So they both go hand in hand, and I think even inclusion should be first, and then diversity. But I think they go hand in hand. No, absolutely. I think approaching it in a business case, from a business case angle, will open up the conversation for more. So I believe that, when you have these open conversations, true conversations about what it is that we want to achieve as a company, as a leader, as a team, and what do we gain from that, revenue-wise, creativity-wise, innovation-wise, that is the first step into that larger conversation and a larger program and a journey that a company goes through. And because the inclusion part should absolutely not be forgotten, right? And that's where also a lot of data will absolutely help to zoom into specific challenge points that you have in an organization. Look at, promotion data, for instance? Is there a difference in women and men being promoted for the same roles, or the speed that they get promoted in? How many women do you get in for with regards to hiring? How many applied, and how many did you actually invited? What is the candidate slate look like? What are the hiring managers? Are they diverse? All those, that data, attrition, exit data, everything. The whole employee journey, so to say, you need to have a good look at. Okay, so if we want to become more diverse, what do we mean with that? And what does that look like? And how does that hit all the steps in the employee journey? And how do we make the changes for everybody to have, a sense of belonging and a sense of inclusion in this company? So absolutely, the business case sounds very sterile. How do you say that in English?
Yeah, I know what you.
Yeah,
I know what you mean.
Yeah, but my experience, it is a very good step to have a business conversation around D&I, right? To make it a true enabler, instead of we all need to change because what we did is wrong. We need to do it, and not that everybody is doing it like that, but I think the mindset change will absolutely help. At least it helps me a lot.
Yeah, well, we see it with our platform as well. So I think in an ideal world, I would only want to have customers who deeply care about D&I. Reality is, of course, that that's not the case for everyone. But what we do see every now and then, and also something that we discuss in our team, is like sometimes you have to accept that people come for, let's call it extrinsic. If you would split it in intrinsic motivation, then the extrinsic would be more the business side, and intrinsic would be just more it's fair. I do see a lot of companies starting to work with our platform more for the business case perspective. And then once they start using it for a longer period of time, eventually I see that it clicks a bit more and that they switch more towards intrinsic motivation.
Yeah.
If they then all of a sudden in a quarterly business review say, hey, we actually ended up hiring someone that we normally would never hire for this role, and they're actually doing very well. So I think that maybe that's also something that you have to accept in some situations, that it just starts for different reasons, and that happens along the way.
Yeah, I agree with that. It's also about, meeting people where they are. I believe that you should do that, but not all the time. Sometimes you also need to give a push here and there, because we can all wait for everybody to be ready, but that will never happen at the same time. So, meeting people where they are is absolutely helpful. And then slowly but surely make the way to, bringing more tools in, bringing more conversation in, bringing more stories in to make that business case more alive. That's really what you're doing. And then you create that inclusive organization with sharing, with trying to, you have all these fantastic new startup companies focusing on VR experience, for instance, right? To bring that in at some point. It all comes in phases. So when you take more of the feeling into it, and the intrinsic motivation is probably a bit later than when you start with a business case, and especially in organizations that need convincing and where the intrinsic motivation is not 100% there yet, the business case will help to crack open the conversation, and then you bring in more of the intrinsic and feeling bit a bit later down the line.
Yeah, because I think we spoke about that a couple of months ago. So the reason why I started this company, for example, I'm in a very privileged position. So I never experienced any form of discrimination myself, but I think that I started it because I've experienced it with people around me. So I had some sort of a personal motivation there. But I think that, a lot of boardrooms, this is a bit stereotyping, of course, but a lot of boardrooms are male, white, and privileged. So they maybe also simply don't have those stories very close by, which also makes it difficult for them, of course. Like you can relate much better to a story if it happens around you, instead of only reading the newspaper, of course. It's not an excuse, but I can imagine that can happen.
Yeah, absolutely true. I think it's hard for people, for me, for you, for the white man in the boardroom, to truly feel and believe something that's so far out for you, right? So it's hard for people, but it's the mindset change that we need to try to create, and that goes through stories and sort of experiences that you can undergo as a majority or a person that is more privileged than another. I think that is, when you want to change, when you want to change as a person, I think there are only two reasons. We spoke about this before, right? There are only two reasons for change, if you ask me, right? So a person will only change because there's a benefit for that person, or he or she is touched by a story, or like you mentioned, something that happens with people close to you or people that you love. And in business, the second one is sometimes a bit harder to start with, right? And that's the intrinsic bit. So the right thing to do is sometimes harder to sell, and it's difficult for me and also for a lot of people to think about selling it. But it's harder, and therefore, if you go for, why would they change? Well, if there's something in it for them, so how do I become more successful as a company, as a leader, as a team leader? How can I, get more revenue in? So that is the balance that you need to find in your organization, if you ask me, and it helps.
Yeah. No, I fully agree. I'm a big fan of, I said it already last time, I never forgot about those two factors why people change. Mm-hmm. And I fully agree. A last question before I also would like to spend some time on answering the questions that people asked somewhere along the way. Mm. If you could list one or two things that you're most proud of in your position that you achieved within Hexaware, what would it be?
Oh, good question. I'm very proud of the DEI champions that I've gathered over the last couple of months. I see that there's a lot of passion with a lot of people to add to the DEI journey, and that is because there's been a lot of communication around what is it that we want to achieve as a company, what is it all about, how can you help? So all the talks and the effort that has been put in there, one of the results is that a lot of D&I champions across the globe are in the team to help out. I'm really proud of that. It is also very helpful. So that is one. Secondly, is that over the last couple of months, there's been a change in, okay, we are becoming more ready. We really want to make change. And one of the examples is that the whole management council of Hexaware came together in India at the end of last year. And I gave a big presentation around, okay, where do we stand now? Where do we want to go? What do we want to achieve? How can it help? How can you change yourself? And it was perceived very, very well. And I'm building on that. So yeah, that's, I think, next to a lot of other stuff that I'm really proud of.
Now, you do have the management board's attention.
Yeah.
And I think harsh reality, I see it a lot with people. We get a lot of demo requests, for example, from people in D&I position. And the experience that I have with a lot of people in D&I positions is that this sounds very harsh, but don't mean it that harsh, but that I sometimes have the feeling that companies just appoint someone for that position, mm-hmm. just to check it off. Mm-hmm. They can create all kinds of plans and strategies and etc. And at the end of the day, there's never budget, there's never time, it mm-hmm. has no priority, as long as you just have it on your LinkedIn profile. So I think mm-hmm. that you're an example of how it can go well, which is hopefully a good inspiration for the people that are listening today. Hey, a couple of questions. I see one. Do you have tips on how to broaden up your talent pipelines for the lesser represented communities? I also find that we have had those conversations also a lot here internally. How can we reach a broader group of people for job openings?
Yeah, it's an interesting question, right? Because I was thinking about the Gen Z generation that comes in, right? So I think in 2030, we have 30% of our workforce being Gen Z. And I read somewhere that this new generation is the most multicultural.
Yeah.
So use their input to find them on the market, right? So learn from each other where to find those people in the market. So have conversations, ask questions. I think that's the best way to do. Word of mouth is always the best. I think the best and strongest way to get the people that you need, referrals and everything. But then your company needs to be ready for it as well, right? So the referral that you get symbolizes what you are as a culture, right? If you still have a large majority culture, the references will also probably be in that majority. But if you use I have a difficulty with the majority and minority thing. But if you use the minority people in the organization, and have them speak and have them advise you and have you teach them, that I think is the best source of information for that question.
Yeah, I think it's a general super valuable tip, because maybe it happens here also every now and then, that these discussions tend to stick within the boardroom, HR, recruitment, but that it never goes into the business. And I think eventually your team is an incredible source for all kinds of questions. Yes. And I mean, this is all about your team. So I think it's a very, very good tip also in general on how to even start the conversation. Michiel asks, how can we lead companies in a meaningful and customer-centric way if the leadership team doesn't reflect our society?
Yeah, I think a lot of companies struggle with that, right? So
basically, I think there are not a lot of examples of companies that have a good representation of society in the boardroom.
Yeah, absolutely. And I have that too. In Hexaware, we still have a very male Indian dominated management council. But I believe in the DEI field, authenticity and being real is valued the most. So if your boardroom has not changed yet, but it's willing to, and is also willing to address that and carry that message across, I think that's a big step and a big help in having those meaningful and true and believable conversations around becoming a true inclusive organization. And in the board, seats are not open that much, right? When there is a vacancy, you really need to immediately focus on, okay, but what are we going to do now? So make those agreements with your board as well, that when there's a seat open, don't fall into your unconscious bias, but really take the time on, okay, what are we going to do with this seat? And be true about it. I think that is the best advice.
Yeah, absolutely. Hey, Marie is asking, how could the management team be helped through the initial and probably also the most uncomfortable period of adjusting to be more diverse, changing languages, way of working, etc.? How do you do that within Hexaware?
Well, I always say, and I also tell myself every day, you cannot boil the ocean at once, right? So although I want to, and I'm sometimes a bit more pushy and a bit more impatient than I should be, because we need to meet people where they are sometimes. I think I speak to a lot of leaders about the 3 C's. So that is something that is always in my mind, is that be curious, be courageous, and be committed. So that it's a mindset change that we're trying to create with the leaders. And if you have a company culture where you can ask questions, you're not immediately laughed at, and you also agree together that those behaviors around DEI are listening to people, don't make judgment, don't make fun of each other, and help each other, and create that space where you can learn and grow, and create the mindset of growth instead of a closed mindset. I think that will absolutely help. And I think talking about it in smaller groups or one-on-one in first instance about their unconscious bias or their challenges or the feelings that they might have whilst becoming more inclusive, I think those are tips for that journey.
Yeah, definitely. Marie says thanks, by the way.
Sure, no problem.
Yvonne is asking, how can you make managers more aware of unconscious biases? Well, I read an article because I was preparing for today's webinar, and I read an article in Forbes, I think, but I'm not sure anymore, that stated like, what are the few DE&I practices that are going to die within companies or should die? And one of the things that they listed was a one-off unconscious bias training. So I guess that might not be the answer. But how do you try to make managers more aware of that at Hexaware? Because I see this quite often with our customers, that we give a training to hiring managers and that they're like, yeah, but I'm not biased.
Yeah.
I mean, everyone with a brain is biased.
Yeah.
So how do you do that?
Well, there is a lot to say about unconscious bias training, right? But I'm a big fan of them. Not the one-offs, but I'm a big fan of unconscious bias training, right? I think, the ones that are appealing for your company and your leadership and every person in your organization. But you need to follow up on it, right? Yeah. It's not a one-off, it's not a tick in the box exercise. So I really believe that if you want to take those first steps, unconscious bias training can be extremely valuable. But you need to make sure that the people that need to drive this through the organization, which is in a lot of situations, the HR people, that they are trained to do that, to keep that conversation alive and to keep pushing that. And you can also think about doing things together, right? In Hexaware, for instance, we're looking, and in Mobiquity already did, cultural understanding trainings with our blended teams, right? So if we have customers that we work with around the globe, there are trainings where you can, in a fun way, but very educational way and very confronting way sometimes as well, is to learn how you are being perceived coming from a specific culture and how you perceive other cultures, how they can be stereotyping, and how, explanation on why do you perceive the other like that. And it immediately clicks on, oh, but this is the reason behind it, as if everything can be explained. But, this is the reason behind this behavior or that. So everything is about understanding, about open mindset, and about having conversations with each other. So I think that's my answer. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. Marie, who just asked you one question, is also a guest in my podcast quite often. And I think one of the things that we spoke about I don't know which episode it was anymore, but we spoke about making stereotypes more explicit. That sounds a bit weird, but vocalizing your stereotypes can also really help there. I see it, we do it here a lot here at Equalture, but we have a very diverse team. We have I think between 20 and 25 different nationalities, but we do express stereotypes quite often, and it's not to make people uncomfortable or to make jokes about cultures or whatever, but also just to emphasize, okay, this is apparently what we think inside. And I mean, sometimes a stereotype can sound a bit like making fun of something, but deep down it is a stereotype and we have it. Yeah. So I always found that also a very valuable tip. Also, after you, for example, had a job interview with someone, just vocalize to your colleague that you had the interview with, like, oh, I actually thought that this person would be like this or this, and then after the interview changed. For me, that helps at least a lot.
Yeah, but I think it does when you link it to learning about it.
Yeah,
right? So,
yeah, exactly.
I completely agree with you.
Yeah, because Megan, thanks for the follow-up. Indeed, like, how can you create a safe space to do that? I think it's not necessarily okay to only vocalize stereotypes and then don't do anything with it, but more that you also evaluate on the fact that, hey, okay, I had that stereotype. Why would that be? And is that fair? So I think that makes it a safe space to also explain that part, but definitely not, I think, to only list them. And let's see if we have room for one more question. Oh, I think this is an interesting one. Okay, I'm gonna share the question and then the little bit of background that Emil gave. Emil asks, what is the impact of the level of education in DE&I? My experience is that I see very culturally diverse teams and companies with highly educated people, but the opposite in companies where there's a mix of educational backgrounds, which is funny because I also see it the other way around quite often.
I don't get the question.
So I think what Emil is trying to ask is are highly educated people, do highly educated teams result also in more culturally diverse teams?
Oh.
But I do see it the other way around quite often as well.
Yeah, but it's a nice question. I never thought about that. So I think in the Netherlands, if you look at the Netherlands, we have these expat arrangements and relocation arrangements by the government, right? But then you have to have a certain level of education to get these rulings done in the Netherlands. So I think if you look at tech companies, there is a highly skilled person that as an expat can come into your organization, and therefore you have more. You might think that you have more cultural diversity through level of education because the government set that rule. But in the Netherlands itself, we also have a lot of cultures in our country itself. And what you unfortunately also see is that in lower ranges, lower educational organizations, cleaning organizations, or people at the cash machines in the cashiers in supermarkets or what have you, are also very multicultural, unfortunately, because or maybe also fortunate, but you see a lot of differences there as well. So I'm not sure if the question to your answer is yes, only higher educational levels where you see different cultures. You see it, I think, across the organizations, across society.
No.
I'm not sure if I answered the question correctly, but this is what I created from it.
I think we will look up some research for you, Emil, if we can find anything.
But a good question, though.
All right, I think we've had all the questions. So if I summarize at least my main takeaway, there were lots of good takeaways, but I think the most important one with regards to why we scheduled this webinar in the first place is, if you would like to get the management team on board, and please interrupt me if I'm summarizing you incorrect, maybe we sometimes have to be okay with the fact that starts from a more extrinsic motivation kind of point of view rather than intrinsic. So try to link very tangible challenges of the company to how DE&I can impact that. I can imagine that for a lot of companies, the talent shortage now is a huge problem. That's easily linked to DE&I, obviously. But follow up with the right workshops, Q&A sessions, safe space to keep having the conversation to eventually flip it around and turn it into a more intrinsic motivational topic.
Yeah, that's absolutely a good summary. So I have nothing to add to that. Well, maybe, yeah. So yeah, I'm very passionate about it because, and I completely understand that people find it sometimes a bit, uncomfortable because the business case is just a business case. Yeah, I know. I believe in DE&I. I believe everybody should be treated the same and equal and equitable. But not everybody looks at it that way. So if you're in a business environment, it will sometimes help to make that shift and take a different approach, which is then a business case or just a business approach, and turn DEI in a true enabler for your business growth and your business success. And then the conversation changes more to, okay, it's a sort of a support thing, an enabler thing for me to reach my goals. And then hopefully down the line, there will become a more of an intrinsic motivation as well, because then there is more room and space for sharing stories and create experiences.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks so much, Gwen, for being here today. Before I forget to mention it, my lovely colleague Kat already posted the link in the chat to our community. It's a free community that you can sign up for if you would like to discuss all kinds of topics related to unbiased hiring and DE&I with different experts. So feel free to sign up. Also, tomorrow, and we will probably include that in the recap of this webinar, we have a big announcement to make with Equalture. I wasn't allowed to say anything more apart from the fact that Gwen is involved. So stay tuned. And Gwen, thanks so much again for being here. I learned a lot, and I hope you enjoyed being here today.
Absolutely. Hope to see you soon again.
Cool. All right. Thanks everyone for listening today, and have a great rest of your day.
Bye.
Ciao.